now. Hi, I'm Brian Alves. I'm an artist and a professor at Salem State University and a resident of Western Avenue Studios and Lofts in Lowell, Massachusetts. This is Western Avenue Inspires. It's a series of presentations and conversations with artists whose work I admire, and I hope they inspire you as well. Western Avenue Inspires is supported in part by a grant from the Lowell Cultural Council, which is a local agency supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. So thank you, Mass Cultural Council and Lowell. So with me today is Ingrid Hess. Hello, Ingrid.
Hi.
You are a professor at UMass Lowell and a graphic designer and a published author illustrator.
Yes.
Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely.
So I want to jump right in because we want to hear a little bit about the work that you do and see the work that you do. And your primary medium is cut paper. Is that correct? How did you land on that medium?
Well, I've always liked to put things together. I love puzzles. I love quilting. I love the way pieces of anything fit. And when I was a child, I did a lot of collage. I just always enjoyed it. And then as an adult, one year I made my mother a portrait of her family. You can show the portrait right now.
All right. There you go.
Mom grew up Amish. She had 7 brothers and sisters and a dog. And so this is a portrait of her family. And I realized that I just really enjoyed doing it. And so then after that, I made a picture for my dad as a gift. And then I started making these one-offs, not really thinking that it would lead anywhere. But the more I did it, the more it felt natural. And I realized this was a medium that could really go places. And so ever since then, I've worked with cut paper.
Nice. Which one is your mom on this?
As I look at the screen, she's on the far left. She's the little girl.
Furthest away from the dog.
Farthest away from the dog, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Nice. So that was is that the very first thing you did with cut paper?
Well, as an adult, it's the first thing I did as an adult. I mean, as a child, I did lots of cut paper things, but this was sort of the piece that changed my career.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Nice. So tell us a little bit. I'm sure that this has evolved over time, the process for developing your illustrations. How do you do that? Do you sketch first? How do you select the paper?
So sketching, let's talk about that first. So you can show the next image.
All right.
So I sketch voraciously. I sketch and sketch and sketch, and I sketch little pieces of paper. And so like the porcupine you see, I maybe drew 15 porcupines before I got to the porcupine that I liked.
Wow.
I used tracing paper so that the first porcupine, let's say I like the ear I made, I don't have to redraw the ear because I put the second piece of tracing paper on top of it. And then I can copy the ear exactly and redraw the rest. So, yeah, tracing is probably that's the second most time consuming part other than just the cut paper. But that's not actually where I start. So if you go to the next, slide, I was asked to explain to 3rd graders what my process was. And I found that really helpful, actually. My process is research first, then writing, then sketching, then the art, and then final assembly. So by the time I get to the sketching phase, I've already worked on a project for many, many months because I had to do research first, and then I had to do a lot of writing.
Okay. So your work is usually multi-panel. Is it always book driven?
It's always for children, but sometimes it's in the form of exhibitions or banners. Sometimes it's in the form of books, but it's always topics that require research and writing.
Wow. Okay.
I think that's what makes me feel more like a designer than an artist, even though I clearly am an artist, but all the research and writing that I put in first feels like a design activity. Now, I'm sure there are many artists that also do research and writing, but I learned how to do that in my design education.
Wow.
And you also ask a question about paper. I just collect paper. I have drawers and drawers of paper. I have a purple drawer and a blue drawer and a green drawer and a red drawer. And no scrap is too small to save. So I'm a bit of a hoarder when it comes to paper.
Wow. How do you establish the line between a blue and a purple?
I just see it. Yeah.
Okay.
So actually, if you go on to the next slide for a moment, this was the second part of what I showed third graders. So I went into a little more detail of what research takes, what writing takes, what sketching takes, what fine art takes, and then what assembling takes. Final art is incredibly time consuming, but it doesn't require much thinking other than just to pick the colors of paper I want. Whereas the first 3 steps require a tremendous amount of thinking. So each step uses a different part of my brain.
So by the time you're done sketching, you have a composition for a page already
I have a
established?
full composition, full composition, and I'm ready to go. And then the final art piece feels a little more meditative. I sort of lose time when I'm doing it. And I enjoy it thoroughly. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you must have a very natural sense of color in order to, I mean, that last final art stage, which you downplay a little, I think probably has a lot more to it than the average person would be able to do quickly.
You know, it's interesting. Color has always been a very significant part of my life. My father is colorblind. And my 2 nephews are colorblind. We have a recessive gene that runs in my family. So had I had sons, they would have had a 50% chance of being colorblind.
Wow.
So as a kid, I was always very, very aware of color. And always tried to imagine what it would be like to see a world that didn't have color in it. It just blew my mind that was how my father was seeing. And now, ironically, I was asked by the Dean of Sciences, Dr. Nuruddin Melikechi, to work with him on a book about color, about the science of color for children.
Wow.
So that is a book that I'm currently working on, which feels like I've come full circle.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea that your father was colorblind. And you knew of that at an early age.
Yeah.
He spoke to you about that.
It was very obvious. Like we had a garden and he was incompetent at picking strawberries or picking anything that would show ripeness by being red.
Wow.
He would not be able to see the red.
Okay.
And so we noticed it. Or he would memorize what clothing went with what clothing so that he would be dressed appropriately.
Wow. Did he ask for help?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So you were quite aware of color.
I was very aware of color. Yeah.
It's interesting to see that first image you did of your mother's family, which was very, to some degree, monochromatic compared to much of the later work that I've seen and you're showing.
More subdued for sure. I mean, I think the Amish are, that the way they have chosen to dress in this world is more subdued.
Yeah. So you didn't grow up Amish?
No, I grew up Mennonite,
Mennonite,
but mainstream Mennonite. So I dressed like most people dress.
Okay. Did that background, your childhood background, influence your work or your interests? Or
I think absolutely. I had two really different influences in childhood. One was being Mennonite, and one was being born and growing up some in Costa Rica.
Mhm.
And I think what I got from the Mennonite side is there's a certain simplicity in my work and a high attention to craft. And when I think of the Mennonite woodworking and quilt making, I think I fall really naturally into that line. But when I think of Costa Rica and the aesthetic there, I think of bright, vibrant colors and shapes. And my work is clearly influenced by that as well. So I had two different influences that both come through in my work.
Wow, those are very different influences.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, do you have work, different stages of your work that you could show us, or?
I mean, I think the sketches, I think this probably shows the
Yeah.
stages most clearly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So, most of your books, or all of them, are nonfiction. Is that correct?
Um, there's one that is more of a poem, or I
Okay.
guess two that are more of poems, but
Okay.
by far the majority of my work is nonfiction.
Okay. How do you decide which topics you're going to address?
So you can go to the next slide.
There we go. Wow.
So I'm so fortunate in the job that I have because as a professor, I get to teach and then I also get to do my scholarship. And my scholarship is defined as I use design to empower children and their teachers and the people that teach them on social justice issues.
Oh, wow.
And there's so many social justice issues. I mean, there's diversity issues, there's environmental issues, there's literacy issues, there's economic issues. There's so many. So I don't feel like that thread limits me. So I often think about, what do I think is important in this world? What do I think the next generation should be thinking about and talking about? What do I think elementary school teachers should be helping their students think about?
Wow.
You mentioned that I'm a college professor, but I really feel like I'm an elementary school teacher that happens to be a college professor. Even though I never taught elementary school, they are my heroes. I think
Hmm.
a good elementary school teacher is gold. And if I can design products, whether in the form of books or in the form of exhibitions or motion graphics, if I can design products that help them teach, that help them start dialogue with their students, then I feel like I've used my talent well.
Okay. Have you heard from teachers about how
Oh
they've used
yeah,
your
all the
work and
time.
what?
I mean, so one really great thing about UMass Lowell is that we partner with Bartlett Elementary School, which is a wonderful city school. And so I get to go in there and focus test with the kids
Wow.
and talk to the teachers. Yeah, so my work does not happen in a vacuum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful. So do you ever change you do all this research and development. Do you ever change the way things are put
Yes,
together based on some of that initial
absolutely. Yeah.
reading?
And a lot of it has to do with the way that kids read. So if you look at the Amish alphabet cover,
With your mom's family?
yes, with my mom's family, a child who's learning to read, might read an Amish Ingrid alphabet Hess.
Right. Yeah.
Because a new reader would read linearly.
Right.
They wouldn't necessarily understand that the way it's designed is
Right.
to help lead your eye. And so you know, as a designer, I'm putting together these interesting layouts, but I have to make sure that they work with the audience. And so whenever I take books that are in the sketch stage to elementary schools, it's very clear what worked and what didn't work. And so if something didn't work, if I have a bunch of kids that are reading an Amish Ingrid Alphabet Hess, then I will change it. You know,
that's not the title of the book.
that's not the way the
Okay.
title works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, wonderful. So, so after you've done this, tested, done all the work, how do you get your books published?
Wow, that is the hardest question. That's probably the question that I get the most from adults, and I don't have a happy answer. It's incredibly difficult to get a book published, incredibly. So that even though I now have 11 books, I still have no idea whether I will ever get the 12th book published.
Wow.
Like, you'd think that after a certain point, a person would be guaranteed publication, and that is not how it works. So I try to be creative, and instead of targeting big publishers, I try to target small publishers or organizations. So for example, Think Fair Trade First was published by a fair trade organization. Mr. Magnificent's Magical Merrimack Adventure I did with the National Park Service, and there's a publisher that exclusively publishes things from the national park called Eastern National. So I really work hard to find publishers.
So you start with an organization at points.
Sometimes I start with an organization. Sometimes to people out there that are looking to get their books published, I think the odds that you will find it published by a large publisher are almost zero.
Wow.
And so think about, you know, does your book have a medical theme? You know, if it does, might Boston Children's Hospital publish it? Does your book have an environmental theme? If so, is there an environmental organization that might publish it?
Wow, okay.
I mean, I am out there trying to be scrappy, and that's what people have to do.
Do you think that has changed over the course of your career? Was it easier, do you think, in the past to have your work published, given the advent of
I think it's
digital?
getting harder. Yeah, I think that I think it's getting much harder, and I'm very concerned about coronavirus and what that's going to do to the parts of the economy that are seen as less essential. And while I'm sure many people think that books are essential, they aren't essential in terms of keeping a person alive.
Right.
Like, if you have to choose between buying food and medicine and paying your rent or buying a book, you're probably not going to choose to buy a book. And so as the economy gets hit, publishers are going to get hit really hard. Yeah. Yeah.
With a lot of teaching online, though, I would imagine that at least some digital versions might be in demand.
Certainly. I think that the more that artists and illustrators and writers can embrace on, you know, any kind of technology, the more successful they will be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whew, wow. Do you have any books that haven't been published that are sitting in your studio?
So many. Oh, you don't understand, Brian. I have so many. Yeah, I have many books that haven't been published. And I send them out and I get rejections. Like, I have received so many rejections in my life. I think that, well, actually, let me start a different way. I have students that come to me and say, you know, I wrote this poem and I want to send it off to, you know, there's some contest. I want to send it off, but I'm afraid I'll get rejected.
Oh.
And what I say to them is, you're afraid you'll get rejected. I promise you, you'll get rejected. You are going to get rejected hundreds of times. And each rejection is a badge of honor. It shows that you are in the fight, that you are trying. And the more you get rejected, the closer you are to that acceptance. So for all of you out there who have gotten rejected, wear it proudly. And I hope you get rejected many more times, because it means that you're out there trying, and at some point your acceptance will come.
I would love to.
I was rejected for 14 years before I got my first book.
Wow.
Not 14 times.
You are
14 years.
Very persistent.
Worth of times. So yeah, it's real.
That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see you do a book about rejection.
You know, that is a good idea. That's a really good idea.
For us, that would be helpful. Wow, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about your fears about the coronavirus and what's happening right now. How has this social distancing affected how you've been working? Has it hindered your creativity, or you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'm not sure I would say it's hindered it, but it's changed it. Mm-hmm. I spoke a little bit earlier about how in different stages of a project, I use different parts of my brain. During coronavirus so far in quarantine, the thing that I'm able to do really easily is the cut paper and gluing, which is I hate to say mindless, because I do believe that there's talent associated with that stage, but it's not the same kind of intense thinking that the research and sketching has. I haven't been able to do research and sketching during this time. Wow. My mind just feels a little too overwhelmed to do that. So that's okay. I'm just focusing on stage 4 right now. And hopefully as the sun comes out and things start to normalize, I'll be able to get back to research and sketching again.
Nice. You've also been teaching.
I've also been teaching.
Three classes or 4?
Yeah, 3 classes.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. So what are you working on right now?
So, well, you can go to the next slide and I'll show you.
Nice.
So this summer, I was so fortunate to get an artist residency at Acadia National Park. And I did a series of banners for kids, which talk about the Wabanaki people, that talk about being good stewards of the environment, that talk about the cool biology that parks have. And based on this project, I was accepted to go to Australia for a month and work in one of their national parks.
Wow.
And do a similar project for them. So I was intending to go this summer, but that is not going to work. But I am going next summer. They were gracious enough to postpone it a year.
Wonderful.
So I'm on the cut paper stage of that project.
Of the Australian
project? Of that, I'm starting to work on that. But then, can you go to the next slide? So in talking to Australia, since they were so gracious in letting me come summer of 2021, I told them that I would do 2 projects for them instead of just 1. So the project that's like Acadia, I'm actually gonna finish prior to going to Australia. And we've just been emailing back and forth so that they can critique my work along the way. But I'd like the following 2 slides, this slide and the next slide, which you can show, are both work that I did about the environment. And so I think the second project that I want to do for Australia, I want to somehow comment on the fires and what was destroyed, and also how we can work to restore and preserve the environment in the face of the fires. And so I think that these two final slides that have to do with water will inform that work.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the very beginning stages right now. I think an effect that coronavirus had is that we all forgot about the fires.
Yeah.
You know, people thought the fires were such a big deal, and now people kind of don't even remember the fires because we're dealing with another thing that is so significant. But I think it's important not to forget what happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's are the fires. This is an example of me not being in touch with this. Are they under control at this point?
Yeah,
Are they out?
they are, but I mean, the damage
absolutely.
is done. Yeah. And so now it's about how do all of us help repair that damage? And I do believe it's all of us, because the choices we make here affect the weather patterns, affect the oceans, affect the environment that's there. So I don't think we can say, well, that's Australia's problem.
Right.
I think it's our problem.
Right. I think it's too easy to say that, but
yeah,
hopefully we, through your work, maybe convince a few other people that we're all involved. So that you would say that project's in the research stage at this point?
Yeah, that one is definitely just in the research, so the very beginning stages.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is have it done through the sketch stage by the time I go to Australia, so that while I'm there, I can be doing the cut paper stage.
Okay. Indoors?
Well, I'll be staying at a national park, so what I'd like to do is spend half the day doing art and half the day exploring.
That sounds wonderful. Getting inspired.
Getting inspired, absolutely.
Yeah. Nice. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? I have a couple more questions, but I want to make sure that you've been able to express yourself.
I think you've done a good job of covering the range.
Okay.
One thing that you asked me the other day was what I would tell my younger self. And this is definitely something that I talk to my nieces about. I have two nieces, Lucy and Annie, who are great artists. And the reason they're great artists, they weren't just born with it. It's that they practice. They just do art almost every day. And I think that art and design is like music or like sports. It's a discipline. And no one is born being a great violinist. You might have a knack for it, but ultimately you will become good if you practice. And no one is born being great at basketball. You might have a knack for it, but unless you practice, you're not going to be great. And the same is just absolutely true for art and design. And I wish that I had known the significance of how important it was when I was doing art as a kid. I always thought of it as kind of frivolous or not important, and now I realize, it was critical. I should have done it more.
Yeah, it's hard though. Sometimes it's hard to prioritize art making, especially in times like these. But you're doing it.
Yeah, I think in times like these, I think art is important. And I've done a lot of thinking about this. Art doesn't necessarily solve problems. I think oftentimes science is what solves problems. But art calls attention to the problems that need to be solved. And I think that is essential work. So I think art and science are wonderful partners, two sides of the same coin. And we're both critically needed in times like this.
Great to hear you say that.
Yeah,
and the work that you're doing, definitely you can see the crossover between the two. And I'm assuming that you also work with scientists when you're doing the research.
I do, yeah. And that is so much fun because, I'm so awestruck by scientists. I'll go into a room of scientists and I'll feel like, oh, I'm so unworthy. But then they'll look at my work and they'll say, oh, you're so creative. I can't even draw a stick figure. And then I realize that they're feeling the same thing about me. And so
Yeah.
we just have different skill sets,
Right.
and they're both critically important. Critically important. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think that will cover it. We'll leave it at the art and science inspires each other
All right.
stage. Um, I wish we had questions from other audience members, but
I
this
know.
particular event is pre-recorded.
Yeah,
Um,
which is a little sad for me because I really like taking particularly questions from kids.
yeah.
I think a lot of kids have questions out there, and I am so happy to answer them. So
Well,
yeah, but thank you very much.
absolutely. Once this gets put out on the airwaves, would you be willing to answer some questions and a follow-up?
I absolutely would. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, thank you so much
So, of
for
course.
joining us and talking about your work. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
All right. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Bye-bye.
Ingrid Hess, thank you. Take care.